All right, everybody, welcome back to Observer University, our second of likely 4 sessions where we get back up to speed. Um, like we did in the last session, what I want to open up with is spirit of the game, because that is so important to what we do out there on the fields. As observers, we are not referees. We have to continually remind ourselves that this is the player's game. When we see something that we don't like, but the players don't catch it, that's up to the players, right? The game remains in the hands of the players. And as I mentioned on our last call, this is what I skim as I get ready for a tournament. This is what I skim as I'm on the flight to a tournament. And if I have to remind myself, I may read it during the course of the tournament as well. But I'll just go over this bullet point A. Spirit of the game is a set of principles which places the responsibility of fair play on the player. Highly competitive play is encouraged, but never at the expense of mutual respect among competitors, adherence to the agreed upon rules, and the basic joy of play. And that highly competitive play being encouraged, that's where we come into play, right? As observers, sometimes there's a call, sometimes emotions get high on the field, and sometimes the players aren't always in the best position or frame of mind to objectively understand and react to what's happening on the field. And that's where we can come in when we are asked to come in or where the rules require us to help de-escalate the situation and keep the game moving. But spirit of the game, again, I can't emphasize that enough. It really helps kind of center me as I get into getting back on the field. So let's get this thing underway. Presenters tonight, myself, member of the Observer Working Group. We've got Mitch Dangler. He's going to be he is the chair of the Observer Working Group. Jana Haymaker, she is the chair of the Rules Working Group, which is just so wonderful to have on this call, as well as a member of the Observer Working Group, and Wally Kwong on the Observer Working Group as well. So in tonight's session, we're planning on 75 minutes. We shouldn't go any longer than that. If we do go longer than that, it will be because there's so much Q&A going on. But we're going to try to respect your time, get you out of here before that 75-minute time limit. So on tonight's call, we're going to talk about pregame. How do we get into the game? What do we do when we get to the field? What should we be doing in the captain's meetings? Wally is going to be talking about what are we doing between points of a game. And we've got Jana talking about resolving calls. This resolving calls, I'm really happy that we're doing this because in our last session, we had talked about resolving calls in the reverse order. And I spoke with a couple of people and they said, yeah, that would be a really good topic to expand on. And so that's what we're going to be doing. That's kind of the grand finale of this call. So Jana, no pressure. I will also go over a little bit of video and then open it up for some Q&A at the end. So I'll just go ahead and jump into it. We're talking pregame activity. So we've got I've got this broken up into 4 sections. Pre-gaming among the crew, those of us who are going to go work the game. How do we pre-game together? What do we do when we're inspecting the playing area? The captain's meeting. What are we going to be doing in the captain's meeting to make that an efficient experience for the teams? And then what do we do as observers to warm up, which is actually something you're going to hear that a couple of times on tonight's game or tonight's call. So the crew's pregame. What is the pregame? So the pregame is, us. It's something we probably don't do enough. It's us talking about how are we going to work this game? What are some situations that we could experience in this game so that we're mentally prepared for it? What rules do we need to talk about so that we make sure that we're sharp and we're on top of it? But first thing with the pregame, we want to make sure that we arrive together. And if I can do a quick sidebar here, we should also depart the field together. We've all probably worked that game where it was a big, intense game, and now it's over, and we can't wait to leave, but we then see our partner chit-chatting with somebody on the other side of the field. In that case, we're going to leave on our own, but ideally we leave the field together as well. But we want to arrive together at the field, if at all possible, and we pregame during that walk. We shouldn't just be talking about, hey, how was your day? How have your games been going? We need to pregame about the activity that's about to come, and that's the next game. We want to make sure that we know each other's experience level. This it seems like we should all know this, right? But there are times where you'll walk onto a field with somebody that you don't know, and you don't know what you're in for, and they don't know what they're in for, right? So as you're walking to the field, it's good to have that quick conversation if you really don't know each other. Hey, what's your experience level? Really? What was your last tournament? How did that work out for you? How was today? My experience level is this. I've done this, and this is how my day went. Knowing that information is going to either put your mind, it's going to put your mind in one of two places. It's either going to put your mind at ease, or it's going to put your mind kind of on alert that, okay, I need to kind of keep my antennas up, make sure that nothing weird happens on the other side of the field. And if something does start to seem a little fishy on the other side of the field, I'll jog in there and help out and have a chat and make sure that everything's okay there. But knowing your partner's experience level, so important. One thing to do is to know who's keeping the score and who's keeping the time. It's actually kind of a trick question. We should both be keeping the score, and we should both be keeping the time. When I started observing, one person was the scorekeeper and one person was the timekeeper. And with experience, you realize, oh, these games go a lot smoother when you just keep your own time and when you keep your own score. And that also has the added benefit of when somebody misses a score, then you can correct it. Or when somebody forgets to start their time, you can correct that as well. So very important for both people to keep a scorecard as well as a timepiece and be tracking the time. Something to talk about going into the games, positioning. Who's going to be in what corner? If it's a windy day and the wind is pushing to one particular corner, that may be a corner that you want the most experienced observer in, because that's where the most of the action is going to happen in that corner. And then the check down. The check down is mainly in a 4-observer system. The check down is, all right, we've got a goal. Who are we looking at amongst the 4 observers working this game to go up and signal goal? That's you usually will say it's like the trail observer and the diamond. They're usually the check down, but we may assign one person to that, and we just need to know when we're going into the game, okay, who is everybody looking at as the final arbiter of, okay, there are no fouls on this play, we've got a goal, and then everybody goes up with their goal signal. Communication. We cannot officiate if we don't communicate. And I will call us officials all day long. We're not referees, we're observers, but as an observer, we're also an official of the game, right? Communication is key. We have to make sure that we're using the proper signals. We have to make sure that we're doing our signals crisply. We need to talk to each other about resolving calls. And my pre-game discussion about communication is, hey, if you've got an opinion on something, make sure I see your signal. You've got your hand on your head for I've got the call. You've got the arms crossed for I don't have the call. Now, we don't want to be standing there all day with our arms crossed, right? Because then we're going to look like we're disinterested. It's kind of like standing there with your hands on your hip. That's one of the things I will talk about with my crew as we go to a field. When we signal, I don't have the call, you don't need a, just make sure I see it, make sure it's a quick casual, I don't have the call, and then you can put your arms down. We don't need to be standing there for the duration of the call. And of course, if you have a key piece of information you think the other observer has to have, then you can jog in and let them know about that. But generally, you'd stay back. But again, that's something I would talk about in my pregame with my partner or my crew. That's a big one, consistency. How are we going to handle sideline management? How are we going to handle things like offsides, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So I'll talk about sideline management. It can look very tilted, very slanted if one observer is being very strict with sideline management and the other one is not even paying attention to the sideline management, right? What means that one team's probably getting technicals when the other side of the field isn't. So it's important that we're on the same page as far as sideline management is concerned. Like, it's an exciting game. People are going to get a little too close to the sidelines sometime. One of the pieces of guidance I give to my team as we're taking the field and we're talking about sideline management is, whenever possible, involve the coach. Whenever possible, involve the captain, right? We don't want to be out there immediately issuing these technicals. We're empowered to do so, but being a good game manager, being good with customer service means that we're going to work with these teams first. Don't make it our problem, though. If we're standing there just talking to the team the entire game, we're going to miss stuff on the field, right? That's where you get the captains involved. That's where you get the coaches involved, and they will usually be a very good resource for you. Offside. Reading in the observer manual is kind of interesting. It says, call every instance of offside. It continues to go, but don't call every instance of offside, right? We want to call offside as if a player were calling offside, and we want to make sure that or that the entire crew of observers are on the same page. If you can make the player legal, make them legal. Strain your eyes to make them legal. Now, if they're 2 yards downfield, you got to call it. If they're a yard downfield, you got to call it. We don't want to be nitpicky about offsides, right? And that's a topic of conversation that I'm going to have with my crew as we walk to the field. We're not going to make our living out here calling offside. And like I said, teams don't want you calling offside in general. Every now and then you'll come across a team that is going to nitpick that. That's going to be the hill that they live and die on. But the vast majority of the teams, they want you calling offside. They want it to be reasonable. When we stop a game with offside, it just kind of disrupts the flow of the game. Now, that's why we want to make sure that when we call it, we call them big. All right, let's move on to the next topic. Scouting report, team tendencies. Have you worked either of these teams already? What do we know about these teams? Now, that doesn't mean that we're going hunting. We're not looking for these things. But is a team offside? Do we have problems with a team sideline? If walking onto a field, I knew that we were going to have a problem with the sideline, that's one of the first things I bring up with the captains and the coaches. Like, hey, I understand that this happens. Work with us. We don't want this to be an issue in the game. We know that you don't want this to be an issue of the game. If you can maybe find somebody to be your get back coach who sees your team and backs them up on each sideline, then great. That's one approach to that. But what is the scouting report for? What do we know about these teams? Weather contingencies. Is it going to be super hot? Is the tournament telling us that we're going to need to take a couple of hydration breaks during the game? Do we have the possibility of lightning? Okay, if there is lightning, we need to review how we stop the play, and how that works. As a refresher, is if there is a lightning delay, the tournament will sound a horn 3 times in rapid succession. They'll do that multiple times. 3 blasts, 3 blasts, 3 blasts. That means that we are in a weather delay. At the first instance of that first horn, that is when we stop play. If the disc is in the air, we're bringing that disc back. We're not going to wait to see what the result of that play is, even if it's a goal. Them's the rules, right? So, for the weather contingency of lightning, when the weather delay goes into effect, we immediately shut down the play. We make a note of where the disc was. We make a note of what the stall was, and we're going to resume play as if we're coming out of a timeout. But all observers, 1, need to know what that procedure is, and 2, need to write it down on your scorecard. And don't put the disc on the ground and just assume that, okay, we'll remember where it is. Write down on your card, where was that disc when we had the weather stoppage? What was the team, right? Because you could forget that. And what was obviously we need to know what the score was and what the stall count was. But weather contingencies, those are things that we do in a pregame so that we're not surprised by the time we get to the field and that happens. And a reminder, professionalism. Everything we do out there, we have to do with professionalism. Players get caught up in the moment. It's an emotional game. Observers can also get caught up in a moment, right? A player comes at you hot. What is your normal reaction? Your normal reaction is probably to escalate and return in kind. Now, we have to remain calm. We need to remain professional throughout the entirety of the game. And look, this isn't just something we talk about at pregame. This is something we may need to talk about during halftime. This is something we may have to talk about after the 3rd point of the game, right? If things start to escalate. So that's a quick rundown of the crew's pregame. And here's my pro tip. Ask each other what you're going to work on this game. We all have things that we need to improve on, right? What is your area of emphasis? In addition to just running an overall good game, what are you going to work on this game, right? Somebody may ask me that, and over the course of the tournament, I may be a little lax on my my timing between points. Okay, I'm going to work on my timing between points. I may have had a moment in the previous game with a player, and okay, now I'm going to work on customer service, right? I'm going to make sure that when I'm dealing with the players, when I'm talking to the coaches, that I'm giving them a high level of customer service. Could be mechanics. the fourth or fifth game of a day, you're wore out. You don't want to stand there with the crisp hand signals. You just want to kind of mail those hand signals in. Maybe that's something that you're going to work out. That's a good question to ask your crew. What are you working on in this game? What we don't want to happen, we were talking about experience level earlier. You can say, yeah, I've been observing for, I'm throwing a number. I've been observing for 6 years. Yeah, but you've been working the same third year you've been working the same year for the last 3 years, which means you don't have 6 years of experience. You have 3 years of experience. You just keep doing it over and over and over. We want to continue to grow and get better. Pro tip, ask each other what you're going to work on during the game. Inspecting the playing area. So this is important, right? We want to make sure that when we get out there, we understand what the surface conditions are. Do the teams need to mark any spots? We want them to do that. That's not our problem. If we saw something that was significantly concerning, we would bring it to the attention of the tournament director and they would get it addressed. But we want the teams out there marking the spots, not the observers, right? We don't want this to be our issue. We want this to be theirs. Because if we grab a Frisbee and we place the Frisbee on the ground somewhere, and somebody steps on it and slips, they're going, well, why'd you put the Frisbee there? Well, because this is ultimate. We always use Frisbees to mark spots for the most part. Make it a team problem. Don't go grab Frisbees and mark it yourself. But know what the surface conditions are, right? Not only for the teams, but for you as well. Do we have high grass? Is it going to be hard to backpedal? Are there potholes along the sideline where you're going to be running up and down? These marks in the middle of the field, you need to know because you could run into them, right? So understand what the surface conditions are. Are the cones correct? Have the cones blown out of the way? When the game starts, that's not the time where we should be thinking, oh, that cone's out of place, because now we're distracted, right? Make sure that the cones, and we have all seen players move the cones. They're doing their pre-game warm-ups. They want to use those cones as part of their pre-game warm-up. Okay, not the end of the world. Let's make sure those are back where they need to be before the game starts. Are the painted lines correct? Remember, the lines are always the line. If you are using a portafield and the wind is blowing those lines, well, that line is the line, regardless if it is stationary where it should be or if it's been blown 4 feet. If we have a sideline that is very wobbly, we don't correct that in our mind, right? We don't say, okay, the line does go a little farther out here, but it should be straight here. So this is where I'm going to call it out. No, the line is the line. You don't have to put extra thought into it. It's the same line that both teams are going to be working with. So the lines are the lines, right? Are they painted correctly? If they weren't painted correctly, if we have these big wobbles, that may be something that I'm going to bring up to the attention of the coaches and captains when we have our captains meeting, so that they know that we're not going to extrapolate where the line should be, but we're going to play the line. Brick marks. Brick marks. This is one of those things that trips me up sometimes. Sometimes you go to a tournament, they don't have the brick marks marked. And then what happens after the disc goes out of bounds and they signal brick? I'm pacing 20 paces, right? We should be doing that during the pregame. Look for the brick marks, make sure they're well marked if they are marked. If they're not marked, just make a mental note of where they are. If they are not marked at all, that's where I pace out my steps, and then I look for something fixed around the sideline that I can kind of use that as my point of reference. That, oh, there's a flagpole there. Okay, I'm about 6 feet in front of the flagpole. And that way I can just run out there, point to the spot on the ground, and people know where to go. We want to do that during the pregame and not during the first time that the disc gets pulled out during the start of the game. Player equipment on the sidelines. Obviously, we need to get that stuff backed up behind the equipment line. At the national tournaments, we have a player line and an equipment line. Get all the equipment behind the equipment line. Over the course of the game, you're going to find water bottles are making their way up towards the player line or even maybe in front of the player line. No, let's not make a big case about it. Let's just mention to the players, hey, can you move those back, please? And the players will generally just move those back. And that's how we want to handle that. Out of bounds obstacles, right? Is there a fixed garbage can 5 feet out the back of the end zone? Are there other out of bounds obstacles that maybe can get moved before we get this game started? So things to be thinking about as you're inspecting the playing area. Know the media and work with them, right? We've all worked games where we have a great sideline camera person and they're just great to work with. And sometimes there's the newer camera person who doesn't really understand what we're doing. They probably have only taken pictures of games without observers, so they're not used to somebody running up and down the sideline like we do. Get to know them, work with them. If they need to move back, have the conversation with them. Don't bark at them. And if it does become a problem, take it up with the tournament director, and they can usually get with the person who's handling media and get that taken care of. But let's work with these folks and be reasonable about it. All right, captain's meeting. So a couple of topics to consider when we're having our captain's meetings. Make sure that you introduce yourselves. I always have to write down the captain's names and their jersey numbers as I'm getting there, because I'm going to forget. By the time they do their disc toss, I've already forgotten their names. I'm awful at names, so I have to write them down. Hopefully I have a problem where there's multiple captains, right? Because the more captains we know about that we can reach out to over the course of the game, the better. So let's write that down. Let's also identify who the spirit captains are in case we need to get them involved for any reason. I've worked a couple of games where I've had to get them involved. I knew who they were, so that worked out very well that I took care of that before the start of the game. Let's make sure that when we're doing our captain's meeting, that we're tailoring the meeting to the teams. That we're tailoring the meeting to their experience level with observers. Some teams just need a quick, hey, I'm Hank, what's your name? Blah, blah, blah. Did you guys ready to do the coin toss? Okay, let's, the disc toss. Who's starting where? Okay, we're moving. Any questions for me? No? Okay, let me know if you have any questions during the game. Sometimes the meetings go that quickly. Other times we have to get a little bit deeper into the weeds when we have the teams that are less experienced with observers. The bottom line is that we want to make sure that there are no surprises for these teams. But at the same time, we don't want them to gloss over in the captain's meeting, as especially newer observers have fallen into the habit of doing. And how do I know that? Because there was a point where I was a newer observer and I ran the captain's meeting textbook, right? And we were there for 5-8 minutes when we really only needed to be there for maybe 3. So let's make sure that we're tailoring those meetings to the teams that you're observing, to their experience level with observers. Be thorough, but get to the point, right? Economy of words. Let's get in and let's get out as best we can. Here's some game-specific topics that you will need to bring up in the captain's meeting, or that you may need to bring up in the captain's meeting. Tournament-specific rules, right? Is this a game to 15 or is it a game to 13? Tournament rules of emphasis, right? We go to some of these national tournaments with a lot of media and language is an emphasis. That's a good thing. Just remind the captains of. Did we notice any playing field issues, the potholes, the wobbly lines? This is where you need to make sure the captains are aware of those things and how we're going to officiate those lines, because the observers are responsible for lines and times, with the exception of the stall count. Weather issues, right? If we think that a storm may come in, we're going to talk about that. And then if sometimes when we get late into a tournament, a winner will go to one field and the loser will go to the next field. And we need to make sure that the teams are aware of that before we start that game. Because at the end of the game, I don't want to talk to them. You probably don't want to talk to them either. They may be a little about, one of the teams is going to be happy and the other team might be a little bit sore from losing. And we wouldn't want that to splash back on us, right? All right. Let's see. Captain's meeting. Another topic. Make sure that you ask the captains if they have any questions about observing or the rules. Sometimes you'll get into these captain's meetings and you'll hear them say something like, we had this other observer say, or this other observer ruled like this. And we're a team out there, right? You may have your opinion about other observers, but we are a team. And we should never throw any other observer under the bus. That doesn't mean that we can't answer the player or the captain's question, right? They're going to ask you a question. This observer said this. My response, and it's kind of one of the arrows I have in my quiver because I've said it so many times to these captains, I would say, well, I wasn't there. I didn't observe what you guys are talking about, but what you just told me, I would tell you this, right? Because when you go to the observer may have a completely different experience of that interaction. And the person asking me the question may have been an onlooker from 15 feet away and only caught a piece of it, right? So just because a player or a captain asks you a question about another observer doesn't necessarily mean that question is necessarily factual, but we don't want to dismiss it, right? We want to answer the question, but I'm always going to put that disclaimer out there that, I wasn't there. I don't know if that's what happened, but based on what you're asking me, here's how I would answer that question for you, right? And then we move on from that. We don't want to start causing any ill will, right? Because that team may see that observer again later in that same tournament or later on in the season. And, we don't want them having a bad opinion of them based on something another observer said. Oh, that person, they're terrible. Oh my gosh. Well, you got us now. You're going to be in safe hands. Well, no, we can't do that, right? And this captain's meeting is where we set the right tone with this important interaction. They're going to be with us for the next 15 or so points. Make sure that we're starting off on the right foot. We're not there to make friends. We're there to be professional. Doesn't mean that we can't be friendly, right? But let's not overdo it. Warm-ups. So we've gotten to the field. We've done our pregame. We've inspected the field. We've told the captains about what we've seen on the field, and we found out what the toss was and all that fun stuff. Now we go to warm-ups. In the warm-ups, next slide, please, as I'm hitting my space bar and nothing's happening. Stretching, have a plan. It's important that now everybody knows how to stretch, right? Okay, bend over, grab your toes, grab your ankle, do this, do that. It's very helpful if you have a plan that you stick to at the beginning of every game, because your body is your greatest tool, and it's important that we preserve it for the course of the tournament. And we talked in our last call about eating properly during a tournament. A tournament is not a place to lose weight. A tournament is not a great diet plan. We have to take care of our bodies. We have to feed our bodies, but we also have to stretch. And I know when I work a tournament, what hurts the most, and that's what I need to pay the most attention to. And so that's why I have a stretching plan for those particular parts, so that I'm taking as best care of them as I can for the situations that are being presented to me. We got to do the warm-up jog, right? We've all worked games where we've just walked down the field and then we go. You're not going to last very long over the course of a long weekend by not warming up through a light jog, right? We have to get a little bit of jogging in. We don't have to be sprinting. We don't, there will be times where we have to beat people to the goal line, but not during the warm-up. That's a good time just to get the blood flowing, get the muscles moving, and warming up that way. And this is a topic that will never get old. Stay hydrated. Make sure you use sunscreen. Nobody's going to take care of you like you. If you don't like what they have in the tournament tent for snacks and things for the observers, bring your own. Okay? Don't complain to them about it. And, bring it to the attention of the head observer if you think it's appropriate. But nobody's going to take care of you like you. Make sure that you have the appropriate amount of water or beverages on the sideline with you at every game. And if you need to bring it yourself, then bring it yourself if you don't like what the tournament is providing for you. Before we get into between points, there is one more topic I wanted to hit on the captain's pregame. And that is that the observer manual states that it is preferred that you do the captain's meeting together, meaning that you do the captain's meeting with the captains of both teams. If coaches show up to this meeting, we can do it with the coaches, but we are instructed to let the coaches know, hey, can we get a captain over here as well? Because we do prefer to have a captain in that meeting. And it's also preferred that we do the meeting with both teams at the same time. There are situations where that may not be possible. And the observer manual on page 14, which I'm looking at right now, does make it possible for you to go have a captain's meeting with one team and another captain's meeting with the other team. When you got there, you may have gotten to the field late and they're doing their last minute chat about what they're going to do on the opening points. A number of features, a number of issues may be coming up here. Make sure that if necessary, that you just conduct that meeting with one team at a time and then go to the other team and have that conversation. And through that process, you may realize, oh, darn, I mentioned this to this captain, but not that captain. It was really important. Okay, well then find the other captain and let them know what you missed during your pregame and you were reminded about with the other team. But chances are, if that's happening, it's because the teams have already gotten together. They've already figured out how they're going to start the game. And we may have gotten there late, or maybe they just got there early. You can have separate meetings if it's absolutely necessary. So with that, let's go switch over to Wally. He's going to be talking about between points. Wally?
All right. Thanks, Hank. Let me get All right, so between points, this is covered not as a complete section in the observer manual. So this is taking bits and pieces of various sections and putting them in together. The whole idea is when you're executing this on the field, right? You don't really think about this as 3 separate sections. It's you know, you only have a certain amount of time between points, right? Hank, it doesn't look like I'm able to change the. No, all right. All right, so so for every point, there's a few things that we're going to have to do no matter what. Scorekeeping, obviously, and then the next one is timekeeping. Hank, you might have to help me out here with the clicking because that does not seem to be working for me. And again, these are specified in the observer manual, right? That's our basic task there, keeping the scorecard and keeping track of time limits. However, in addition to those standard things in every point, there are some situations you might find yourself having to deal with, or several tasks that you might need to do during that time. The first is communicating with the other observers working the game, and also the other option is communicating with players or coaches, right, about any potential situations going on in the game, and looking after yourself. The last bullet there is really important, and it's the main issue is you have a limited resource, right? With the new rules, you have 85 seconds to resolve, or actually less than 85 seconds, because realistically, you have to be at the line in probably about 50 seconds or so, right? So you have to decide what you're going to do during that point. So for every point, right, this is the standard scorekeeping and timekeeping stuff here. So the assumption here is we're starting with the goal signal, right? Obviously, there's some stuff to take care of before that, right? With the checking the field is all clear and things of that nature. So I'm not going to cover that here. That's going to be covered. That's probably a discussion for a different day here. But so once you've signaled the goal, though, right, after that, you immediately start your stopwatch. But make sure to keep your eyes on the field, right? Keep your eyes on the players. A lot of dust-ups that do happen, obviously, we want to prevent that from happening. And our attention to the actions immediately after a score can help us prevent any situations from escalating there, right? So keep your eyes on the players immediately after the goal, and to monitor those situations. And then after we've made sure that the players, you know, have disengaged from each other and are going to their respective end zones, then you can record the point on the score sheet. So as you're walking back, though, you want to be communicating the time limit warnings, right? And again, this is similar to what we want to do during the point when we're making calls actively, right? We want to make them both visually and audibly, right? So that people can see this without really having to look around and seeing what exactly the deal is. So this slide is mostly just a copy and paste from John's slide from ObserverU 101 that we had a couple of weeks ago. So this shows the time limits that we have under the new 2020 to 21 rule set. The 2 major changes, well, actually 3 major changes, is one for the mixed division that we have to signal the gender ratio at or before the 25-second mark. And offense now must establish their line at 55 seconds. So we also give them, the offense, the 20 and 10-second warnings for that. And then finally, the overall time limit, which used to be 90 seconds, is now down to 85 seconds. So everything's just a little bit more compressed than we're used to, right? And with more stuff doing, that takes away even more time. We have even less time than we're used to take care of a lot of stuff between points. So common situations, there's, as I stated before, there's really 3 major, or actually 4 major things, right? communicating with the rest of your observer crew to check with potential stuff going on, checking in with one of the players or basically player, captain, and coach on one of the teams. And as Hank alluded to before, there's potential situations with the media and camera positioning. Obviously, like you're going to talk to them beforehand, and it's great to establish a rapport with them before the game starts. But when the rubber hits the road, it's going to be, you're going to have to take care of that situation in between points, right? And like I said before, taking care of yourself, right? Hydration. So with those 4 choices, right, you have 85 seconds. And then minus, right, like 20 or 30 seconds. So realistically, you have 45 seconds or so to take care of stuff. You got to make a priority choice there of which one you got to take care of. So for discussion with the observer crew here, it's really good to check in with your crew every 3 points or so. And more often is certainly good if you guys want to do that. But even if it's just a, hey, you know, things are going great, like no issues, but realistically, yeah, 3 points, right? Because something will pop up, or even if it's not game related, it's something with the observer mechanics saying, oh, maybe we should have transitioned to an end zone set as the observers a little bit earlier, or things of that nature, right? It doesn't have to be just gameplay related items. It can be observer mechanic stuff related also. It might be useful to discuss non-calls by players. Again, this is highly recommended just to hone our abilities, right? So we can discuss any plays, right? If players, like there's a close call, but the players didn't call foul, and we can discuss, oh, what'd you see, like, and make sure you have the same outcome there, right? And this goes to improving consistency, right? We want observers to be able to have the same outcome, right? Between crews, right, on the same game, and also between crews at the same tournament. And obviously, we will have some variability from individual to individual, but the goal is to have everybody have that consistent level of performance. Another really useful thing to do here is between points and discussing with your crew is to determine what I call the quote unquote active areas being utilized by teams, right? So this refers to the overall offensive and defensive strategies. What are they doing, right? Are they running a vertical stack? Are they running a horizontal stack? Is the defense running a straight person to person? Are they running a zone? What type of zone, right? And what's the flashpoints there, right? Even within the same system, right, like a vertical stack can be utilized very differently, right? So for example, if you look at how, say, a Boston Ironside used to run their vertical stack versus how Revolver ran their vertical stack. They're both running vertical stacks, but they do it in very different ways. And so the spaces they are attacking are very different, right? So talk to your crew and figure out, okay, this is that like area where the cutters are going, that's likely, and this is where the areas that are the cuts will be coming from. And so that's the areas that we will have to pay attention for picks and, say, downfield offensive fouls. And keep in mind, these active areas can change throughout a point, right? Like no team is going to stay in the same offensive set the entire time, or a lot of teams, they're not going to stay in the same defensive set, right? They'll transition from a junk to a person defense or something similar, right? So and also so just keep in mind what those situations are and what those new zones that you have to pay attention to throughout the point. And also, for finally discussing with your observer crew, is to figure out, are there any potential issues that we need to discuss, right? Either with the teams, right? Or do we have to pay attention to particular matchups that merit more awareness? Like Hank said, we're not going hunting for these, right? But at the same time, it'd be folly to ignore what's happened already in the game. And just be aware of, well, that's been a flashpoint in the past in this game. So it would make sense to pay attention to that either particular matchup or particular cut for the rest of that game. And similar to that, though, is just discussing, hang on, Hank. similar to that is discussing, which potential, game management there, and talking about, like, oh, like, is their cup too tight? Like, is it only like 3 meters apart, right? Instead of the 10 meters, like, is that something we have to talk to the teams about? So that kind of brings me into my next slide here with, and having discussions with one of the teams, right? So a player, captain, or coach on the team. The key point here is that this is, Ultimate is still a self-officiated game, right? The game still belongs to them, and we want to help uphold spirit of the game, right? Help them improve their communication, right? We're there, but it's much better if we help the players play the game it's supposed to be played, right? Use the spirit captains. That's what they're there for, right? A lot of times, like you'll have a player come up to you and say, hey, like, did you see the, like, they're getting really handsy with me in the stack, or some other similar infraction that they're describing. In that case, the first response should be, okay, have you talked to the opposing team about that? And a lot of times they'll go, oh, wait, I haven't. So use the spirit captains, right? That they are there to facilitate that communication, and a lot of the times that will help fix a lot of problems before they escalate, right? Like, again, this is, we don't want to assess misconduct, right? Obviously, like, if misconduct happens, yes, we will assess it, but it is part of our job to help prevent it before it even happens. And part of that is having the teams talk to each other and establish that communication. Safety issues, though, this is similar to misconduct. This should be addressed proactively, right? So this is similar to issuing a TMF, PMF, right? Like, there are fouls in which it is dangerous play, and we can immediately assess that without any team bringing it up. Similarly, for a safety related issue on the field, and if we're discussing that with, even if it doesn't merit a TMF, PMF, that's pretty rare, though, because that probably is indicative of some misconduct already. But safety related stuff, you should absolutely bring up with the teams immediately. That you don't need to wait for the other team to bring that up. That being said, though, for other types of fouls, so for example, like, excessive bumping on the mark, or excessive picks downfield, that's not a safety related issue. And so, again, this goes to the heart of self-officiating. We let the players play, how they want to play it, right? If the opposing team hasn't called that infraction, they haven't made any in-game calls on it, then we shouldn't really bring that up. But once the opposing team has made in-game calls on it, right, they're calling that foul, they're calling that contact or whatever, then yes, we should bring it up and raise that issue with the infracting team. Or if after the point the opposing team comes up to you and says, hey, like, this is going on, right? Then yes, absolutely talk with the other team. But again, as I said before, right, you don't want to be the conduit for that discussion. You want to help them have direct communication between the teams, right? You want to have the spirit captains discussing and resolving that. As Hank said before, right, like, in a lot of games, we will be dealing with media, with photographers, right? And I think there's probably more photographers now than there are, I don't know about that, but a lot more tournaments are certainly covered by photographers than there are observed tournaments. So chances are, if we're at a tournament, there's probably going to be either a photographer or some camera person of some sort, right? In terms of priority, the players absolutely have priority, right? They are right. The players own the game, and our positioning, we should adjust our positioning to suit the players. But then after that, the media certainly has to adjust their positioning, right, to accommodate the observers, right? Because our actions, our movement on the field, it does affect resolution of calls, right? So when you talk to a cameraman or camera person, I should say, it's not really a discussion. Just politely tell them, it's like, hey, like, I noticed that last time I was running down the field, And that was pretty close. Like it make me feel a lot more comfortable if you got, like adjusted your position a little bit earlier, right? Again, do it politely. You don't have to get all up in their face about it. And most of the time, the media person will adjust. All right. And if they don't, this is where you call in some help from the TD, right? Or if you also know some of the other media people around that you can talk to, some of the more experienced photographers around, and hopefully get them to talk to their colleagues, like, hey, like, you should really be adjusting a little bit earlier than that situation. So static setups, that is stationary equipment, and that's got to be outside the equipment line. Of course, like not every tournament has that second outside equipment line, right? And in that case, just use common sense, right? Is it a safe margin, right? If a player is making a full speed play, do they have sufficient time and space there to avoid an injury situation with a stationary, tripod camera or whatever? Like 5 yards is the absolute minimum, but it might not be sufficient, right? So for a larger setup, like if for example, Ultiworld has a scaffolding setup, that's something that should be really taken care of before the game. And in that case, you should probably have that discussion with the tournament director. Setups within the equipment line must be what I call bailable. That's not an official term by any means, but what it refers to is that if the play is coming towards the photographer, they have to like instantly be able to jump out of the way, right? So just because a camera person is on the ground, right, with their camera, like it may or may not be, right? So like if they have equipment sitting on the ground right next to them, that's not available, right? Because if they have to jump out of the way, like they're going to get out, but their equipment's going to stay there, and that's still not any good, right? So just make sure that all their stuff that they can get out of the way instantaneously. Sometimes the camera person will set up within the player line, right? They'll be like within that 3 yard space between the sideline and the player line, and that's okay. But and as long as they're not conflicting with what you need to do, right? Again, if they're getting in your way, politely talk to them and ask them to move out of the way in time. Finally, look after yourself between points, right? As Hank said, you are the best person to take care of yourself, right? Stay hydrated between points, right? So after all the stuff that I listed before, it's not a lot of time. But again, you're no good to anybody if you yourself aren't physically able to perform your task, right? Stay hydrated and consume any food that you have that if you feel that you need some electrolytes or salts, whatever, do that. Sunscreen, as Hank said, you don't want to end up a bright red lobster at the end of the day. So, refresh that sunscreen if you need to. And finally, also, you might notice that the weather has changed, right? Like if you're starting around really early in the game, right? Or really early in the day, it might be a little bit chilly. So you might have like a long sleeve layer on underneath, and all of a sudden it's gotten up to like 70 degrees, and it's like, oh geez, right? So that's your time between points. Take off your layers. Make sure that you're able to perform as you're able to. The important part here is preparation starts before a tournament, right? Like we can say all we want about staying hydrated and eating sufficient food, but I suppose this isn't directly related to in between points, but it just makes your life in between points so much easier, though, if you have done that preparation, right? If you are in shape and if you have, correctly looked after your nutrition, running up to a tournament. So to recap, Hank, there we go. So to recap, so every point we've got scorekeeping and timekeeping to keep track of, right? That's always the case, right? Common situations we got to take care of, right? Communicating with within our crew, right? Communicating with a member of one of the teams, and also looking after yourself, right? And the key here is this is a limited resource. You have 85 seconds, so spend it wisely.
A very quick 85 seconds.
Yes.
Mitch and Jana, feel free to open your mic if you want to make this a little bit more of a round table, but a couple of things that I picked out off of this. One of the things you'd mentioned earlier there, Wally, was keep your eyes on the players. After a goal, we do our signal, we go goal, and we usually go right to our stopwatch and we're looking at our stopwatch, and then we pull out our time card or our scorecard. Now we're writing on our scorecard. And when we're writing on our scorecard, we're not looking at the players. When we're on the field, it's a constant threat analysis, right? I mean, we're looking for threats. That's what we do out there. And the moment we miss one is where we start getting in trouble, right? So once the play is over, we need to keep our eyes on the players. And that's something that I will be talking about as we get into the game management portion of this stuff. Let me go ahead and click this.
Just, Hank, can you go back to the slide, one more slide back there? Yep, right there. With limited resource time, just one thing I want to point out when I was listening to Wally talk was we have, you know, as he said, we have really limited resource between points in terms of time. If it's a really hot day, don't be afraid to let that first warning on like the offense being ready slip to sneak some water in, because the time between points slipping to 90 seconds on a point or two here or there versus you collapsing because you don't have proper hydration, or even just you not being, you know, on your toes, catching calls. Stay healthy before you stay on time there. I'll say, you know, obviously don't let it slip to, you know, a minute 45 or, you know, 2 minutes, but don't be afraid to give up one signal, one warning to, especially if the teams are really good about being on time. Don't be afraid to let that slip in the name of safety. You're taking care of a brewing, you know, an escalating war between players or something like that.
Right. That's a great idea, Mitch. And when you have that kind of power, you have to be responsible with that power, right? We can do it a couple times over the course of a game. If we're doing it multiple times and that time is now expanding, then we've got a problem. The rules are there, and if USA Ultimate decides after when a rule change comes through, they need to fine tune it, then they'll fine tune it. Yeah, 100%. We do have that flexibility as long as we take care of it. That flexibility will be taken care of. That flexibility will be taken away from us once we're found abusing it. And with that, we'll switch over to Jana. This is kind of, for me, the highlight of the call. So if you fell asleep when I was talking just a minute ago, please wake up and give Jana your undivided attention, because this is great. I'm so excited we're going over this. I saw some of this earlier. I was like, that's exactly what I needed to know. So hopefully, yeah, you guys have that same experience that I did when I was learning some of this stuff. Jana.
Okay. So Hank, this says I have control of your screen.
You do.
Okay. But I don't know how to use it.
Spacebar?
No, it doesn't like it.
Click your mouse.
Yep. There we go. Okay. So after our last, I guess it's a couple weeks ago, presentation, I think folks really wanted to get more in depth. It doesn't like me.
I'll run it.
Okay. We wanted to get more in depth on, you can put them all up on this slide, about how to resolve calls, especially for multiple infractions. So we're going to go over 5 examples. And this rule is sort of at the center of it. You know, you resolve in reverse sequence. If an earlier infraction is determined not to affect the play, basically don't resolve it. Offsetting infractions where if you can't determine the sequence and it's offsetting, the disc is returned to the thrower. And then we have this special exception saying like if separate fouls occur while the disc is in the air, and we have examples of all of these, but the player hasn't started to catch or block the disc, then these fouls are treated as they happen simultaneously and on the same play. Another rule that is going to be used a lot in these next 5 examples is the continuation rule. So especially 17C1 and 17C3 and 17C5. But I'm not going to throw that up there. So we'll go over example 1 first. So the marker is going to call a foul on the thrower during the throw. And then later a receiver calls a defensive foul on a defender during the reception, and the pass is incomplete. So how are we going to resolve this? So first you resolve the receiving foul and then the throwing foul. And I did not draw diagrams on this one, but so let's say so first things first, don't throw the disc back to the thrower. Just keep the disc where it is. So if the receiving foul is upheld, the possession is awarded to the receiver, but we still have a throwing foul then to resolve. If throwing foul is upheld, the disc is going to be returned to the thrower. And that's because by awarding possession to the receiver, that's like a completed pass. And so you're going to return the disc to the thrower. And if the throwing foul is overruled, the disc is going to stay with that receiver. But if you if you overruled the receiving foul, you said, nope, that wasn't a foul, the outcome is going to be a turnover, because no matter what happens with that throwing foul, the result's still going to be a turnover. So I think this one is fairly straightforward. Example 2 is really similar, except in this case, the thrower is calling a marking foul. And then that's the only difference here. So it's a marking foul, then a receiving foul. And so we're going to do the same thing that we did with the first example. We're going to resolve the receiving foul first, and then the marking foul. And in this case, if the receiving foul is upheld, that awards the possession to the receiver. And it doesn't really matter how you resolve the marking foul, because no matter how it's resolved, the disc is going to be to the receiver. If the marking foul is overruled, then it's a turnover after this first call. And this is where the reverse really starts to matter. So now you have to go to the marking foul. And if the marking foul is upheld, the disc will be returned to the thrower. Don't send the disc back after the receiving foul. Keep the disc until you figure everything out. Then if the marking foul is overturned, the disc is going to stay a turnover. So these two are really similar. Example 3. So we'll introduce a pick. So if a pick is called while the disc is in the air, and then a defensive receiving foul is called by a different pair of players. So an offensive receiver is calling foul on the defense here, and the disc falls to the ground. So again, we're going to resolve the receiving foul first, and then the pick, reverse order. So if the receiving foul is upheld, that awards possession to the receiver. If the pick affected the play, so if the defender thinks they had a play on the disc, except for being picked, the disc is returned to the thrower. If the pick did not affect the play, the disc stays with the receiver. So if the receiving foul is overruled, it's a turnover, because no matter the outcome of the pick call, the result will still be a turnover. I don't see any questions coming on the side chat, so I think we're okay. We can talk about these at the end if we need to. So another example, they're getting slightly more tricky. This one's actually fairly straightforward in the rules, but it's not as common. So 2 receiver opponent pairs call foul, one against the offense, one against the defense while the disc is in the air. But before anyone starts trying to catch it, the disc falls incomplete. So this is exactly the 17.17H3 rule. If separate fouls occur while the disc is in the air, but before any player starts to attempt to catch or block the disc, those fouls are treated as simultaneous and on the same play. So how do we resolve that? So if they're both upheld, in this case, we had one against the offense, one against the defense. The disc is going to be returned to the thrower, and with the count reached at +1 or 6 if over 5. If both rulings go in favor of the offense, then the disc is awarded to the offensive player, the receiver, if they call a receiving foul. Typically in that case, that's what you're going to have as a receiving foul call. And then if the rulings are in favor of the defense, it's going to stay a turnover. Okay, this last one has a lot of nuance and might prompt some discussions. So the dump calls foul on the defender just before the throwing motion during the windup. The thrower hucks the disc, but the offensive receiver calls foul on the defender as the disc falls to the ground. So we know the order we're going to go here: receiving foul first and then the dump. But it gets a little tricky because of a little rule 17C1. So if the receiving foul is upheld, the disc is awarded to this receiver. But we have this rule called, it's 17C1. It says, despite any outcome dictated by these rules, if the involved players on both teams agree that the infraction did not affect the outcome of the play, play stops and the result of the play stands. This provision does not apply if the thrower is aware an infraction has been called and subsequently attempts a pass. So what could happen in this situation is the players could determine, since that dump call was it was basically during the windup, the foul call, that it didn't affect the play. And the players can agree that it didn't affect the play. And in that case, the disc would stay with the receiver, even though the continuation rule says that if you have a completion where the offense called foul before the thrower throws the disc, it comes back. This is not something that we as observers can rule on. This has to be in the player's hands. So we can't rule to force an outcome that's outside of basically the standard continuation rule. The second clause here, so if there's not agreement that the dump foul did not affect the outcome of the play, then the disc is going to be returned to the thrower like the continuation rule says. If the receiving foul is overruled, then it's just straight continuation rule. If the dump foul did not affect the play, it's a turnover. If the dump foul did affect the outcome of the play, then the disc is returned to the thrower. So yeah, so actually, Mitch, did you want to, I think there's lots of questions on this one. Let's see.
So far, there's only one question that has made it into the spreadsheet, and Mitch answered it. So I'll let Mitch.
Well, no, there's two questions that popped up that are the same question on this issue about us not stepping in on the, ruling on whether a play affected it if it's not one of the standard continuation rule, kind of what I call the leg of the continuation rule. And honestly, I'm trying to think through whether I don't know if I would like proactively ask them, but if they're trying to figure it out and they're trying to, if they're trying to figure out whether it would come back, whether it's affected or not, I don't think there's a problem with saying, well, you guys can agree that if you guys both think that it didn't affect it, you can agree that you ignore it and just the outcome of the play stands. But if they've decided how it's going to be, I wouldn't like interject to like, well, remember guys, you can do this. Like I would just let them do what they're going to do. I think, would you agree with that, Jonna?
Yeah, I wouldn't step in there. But a lot of times what they'll do is ask, so what do we do now? And I, so this is sort of where you need to read the room to,
Yeah.
because they might be saying, because sometimes they'll both be saying, but it didn't affect anything. And so if they're both sort of already saying it didn't affect anything, you can tell them the rule. You'll probably have 17C1 fairly memorized.
Yeah, and I'll add to this, Jonna, that when I was going over these slides earlier today, I had to comb over them a couple of times, and you and I had a little bit of back and forth on it until I really got a good grasp of it. I will share these examples out to everybody who's on this call. Actually, I'll send out to the entire observer group. This is something that we should be studying on our own, because it's complex. There's multiple moving parts here, and you really gotta think it through before it gets baked in. So we'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of these examples. I'll also add that this reverse order thing you have made such great sense of. One of the ways that I have kind of transitioned my thinking is by importing something from football. And that is, we do it in reverse order to find out what happened last on the play. But they don't get to keep that down there if they got the disc with dirty hands. And what does that mean? Dirty hands means that, okay, we had a foul downfield, and now the defense is going to be awarded the disc. But wait, there's more. The disc never would have gotten that far because we have a foul by the defender by the marker on the thrower. So now we're going to return that disc back to the thrower, and the count's going to be 1, right? It's this idea that they got the disc with dirty hands. The disc never actually got there, but we need to go in reverse order before we get there. And Jonna, I mean, it can't be, you mentioned this a couple times, and it's worth mentioning a few more. Don't throw the disc back. Keep the disc where it is. Don't let people start changing their position until we figure out what in the world is going to be the outcome of these plays. On that, Jonna and Mitch, anything else we want to talk about on this, or do we want to go into the Q&A?
I think we can go to Q&A, though I will say, when you have these multiple fouls on the same play, things feel like they go a lot slower because a lot of people don't know what's going on.
Well, and how many times have we been in this situation, Jonna, and we've gone, I don't remember who was on offense. It happens. You get turned around. All right, Q&A. So we had a couple of questions pop up in the chat window, and we're actually going to wrap up with this. Mitch, we're going to save your video for the next call, just out of the time restraints I'm putting us under. So we had some video. We'll look at it on the next call. The one question here was, and Jonna, I'll let you answer this one. What's our ruling on, I stopped playing because I heard the foul, but I could have made a play, right? The player who stops because somebody said foul and they didn't continue playing through the remainder of the play.
17L. A player's ability to catch or make a play on the disc is not considered to be affected because that player stopped, slowed down, or otherwise ceased to continue playing because a call was made by another player.
That's textbook. Especially because you read it from the textbook.
Yes.
All right. So folks, we're at 7:44. We're going to call it a night here. Thank you for jumping on the call. I will say that we have got 2 more sessions coming up, and these are going to be blockbuster sessions. We're going to be talking about things that are passions of mine. We're going to be talking about mechanics. Where do we stand on the field? How do we stand on the field? How do we look standing on the field, right? I've got tons of video clips of my good friends and myself looking awful just standing on the field. That's mechanics. You got to look the part. You got to look sharp. And then we're going to talk about what I think is the grand finale of all of this, game management. Game management is, how do I interact with this player who's upset about something? How do I handle this complex situation? What do I do when this happens? Yeah, there are some observers who, when they leave the field of a competitive game, the teams really aren't talking about them. And then there's other observers where it seems like the players are always talking about them, right? The difference there is game management. Game management is what separates observers, and it's huge. It takes years to get good at it. You know, it's one of those things that when you leave a game and you replay something in your mind, that's where you get really good at game management. It's the, wow, that didn't go very well. How could I do that better in the future? You think it through, you figure out how you're going to handle that situation again in the future. You put that arrow in your quiver, so the next time it happens, you're ready to pull it out and fire. And I talk with Mitch and Frito about this quite often, that you get to a place in observing where you've never you see the same things over and over until you know how to handle those same things over and over. So it becomes so much easier. That's game management, and that's the one I'm really excited about in 2 weeks. But we'll talk again next Tuesday, same bat time, same bat channel, same Zoom link, and we'll do it again the following Tuesday, and that'll wrap up getting us ready for the return to play. Mitch Dangler, closing thoughts?
Just to add on to what Hank said there about game management, I will say that, like, when I'm running, when I'm picking who's going to work the like finals and semifinals games at these national championship tournaments, like, game management is the key item. Like, yeah, you can have the crispest hand signals in the world. That's going to help you. But game management is what gets you on the field in those games. That really is where it separates the good observers from the great observers.
And I think Jonna had a homework assignment for everybody.
Oh yeah, reading section 17 of the rules.
Section 17 it is. Mitch, when can we expect to have is the new observer manual already out? Where do we stand on that?
The new observer manual is on the website now. I mean, it's not the official publication because it still doesn't have the final hand signals with all the photos. I think that's the case. At least it was last time I saw. But in terms of the meat and potatoes, in terms of like procedures and all that's the main parts, that it's there.
Okay. And in closing, we had a special guest on this call, Ruben Berg from WFDF. I have no idea what country he's in, but I know it's not one of the time zones we're in. Ruben, did you learn anything from this call? You have to unmute yourself.
Yes, I did. No, it was great to hear all the different discussions and see how things operate there in USAU. It was excellent.
All right, well, we've got 2 more. You're welcome back to the next 2 as well.
Thank you.
We'd love to have you, Ruben. We'd love to have you come join the Observer program.
We'll see about that.
Right.
I'd love for you all to come and join the Game Advisor program too.
We'll see about that. And on that note, we are in agreement that we have gone over time. Thank you, everybody. You have my email. If there's something you want to talk about for the next call, please do so, and we will make it happen. Have a good rest of your week, everybody.